it took me a while to really find the future leaders of my company, because I knew there was going to be an exit at some point. So I took my time in trying to find some people that I knew that I could coach and mentor and train to take over the company. And that's what helped with not only my exit, but also helped with the increasing the valuation of my business. And then the second thing is to have a framework in which I could scale my business. There was a couple of programs out there, Traction and Scaling Up. Mm-hmm. And it just allowed me to, again, create my vision, create my quarterly rocks or goals, and hold myself accountable and bring in some of those key performance indicators to help hold my team accountable to where the company was going.
Robert Clinkenbeard, welcome to the ROI Online Podcast.
Amazing, right?
I think the first thing that's obvious and the question I need to ask is your accent gives away you're from out of town.
Yeah, I confuse a lot of people because I was actually born in, this will disappoint you, I was actually born in Grand Island, Nebraska, which nobody believes me. But I moved to Scotland, which is where my mum is from, and grew up 30 years in Scotland, in Edinburgh, in Scotland, mm-hmm. and spent some time there, some time in Glasgow. So obviously that's where my accent is. That's where my guts and determination is from. So yeah, it's a great place.
Yeah, well, good. I wouldn't have picked Nebraska, that's for sure. So you've got a company called the Radix Group. You've got a podcast called The Commercial Landscaper. We'll clarify on that one. And then you've got a book. You wrote a book called The IronmanMindset for Entrepreneurs. So where does the Commercial Landscapers podcast come in?
Yeah, I felt as though I really enjoy talking to people and just extracting all their knowledge. And I just thought, well, commercial landscapers, obviously my background is landscaping. And even though I sort of try and have that niche, I open up my interviewees with all different types of industry. So I'll just do a 20, 25 minute interview with them. Again, extract all the great information from them and share that with my audience. So yeah, I really enjoy doing it. I do weekly podcasts and I love it. I love doing it.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about the Radix Group. You work with leaders. It's hard to think about it, but if you're not a leader, one of the hardest things to do is get your vision out of your head and get it really clear so that the people that want to be a part of what you're doing can go to the right place on the horizon.
That's correct. I mean, one of the things I do when I go into companies, I'll just start asking them a lot of questions just to find out, where they're at and what their struggles are. And, 9 times out of 10, most leaders, owners are still working very much in the business. So they're just working with the day-to-day minutiae, they're pushing sand, and they're not allocating enough time. They're not setting enough time to be reflective and work on the business. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges I find, is that I try and sort of pull them out of that day-to-day minutiae, pushing that sand, to start thinking about, well, where's the company going? Where's that vision? Where are they taking the rest of their team members on? What does their exit look like? So really just start to work with them to figure out where's the company going? Where's the leader going?
So would you agree that most business owners are often too busy to see the full potential of their business when you say they're working on their business or in their business?
Absolutely. Yeah, they don't see the full potential because they're just dealing with that daily grind, and they're coming out every single day. They're exhausted. They're just they're beat up. They're getting punched from every side, and so yeah, that's my goal, is to basically get them to elevate themselves up and start working on the business and try and get that breather.
So why did you decide to plant your flag there? What made you like go, I can do this. I can help other business owners. You haven't been there or something, have you?
Yeah, I've been through that whole struggle, all that slog, and I think probably one of the pivotal moments for me is that when I went from Scotland to Arizona back in '99. I figured out, well, why are people living like this? They're in this beautiful environment, it's sunny. They're maybe in their second or third houses. And here I am in Scotland. It's miserable, wet, it's dark and gloomy. It was just really depressing. So I thought, well, how are these people being like this? What's leading them to this successful lifestyle? So I started just to be reflective on how I could get there, and I figured out a lot of them had their own businesses. So yeah, I did start my own business. I had an exit in 2016, but once I sold that business, I thought, well, what am I going to do now? Where am I going to go in the future? Am I going to start another business? And I thought, well, if I manage to go through all these challenges with moving to another country, setting up a business, going through all the struggles, making all the mistakes I did, why not give back to the business community and help them make less mistakes, allow them to level up? So that's why I started the Radix Group, and that's why I go into companies and just help coach them through some of those challenges they're facing. Again, try and elevate them out of that day to day. So I really take great pleasure in helping other business leaders.
I was fortunate enough to win this scholarship from Goldman Sachs, and they picked a certain number of entrepreneurs to go through a little boot camp for 8 weeks, or maybe it was longer. But I remember one of the epiphanies that came out of that. I'm sitting in this class there in Boston with 40 other entrepreneurs in all various different stages. And we were eating lunch at one of the lunch breaks, and I'm sitting there, and it just really hit me that we were talking about things that I didn't get to talk about with any other person. And it's like all of a sudden this emotion came over me that I'm not crazy. All these things I'm dealing with is not unique.
It's so true. It's so true, because I think a lot of business owners, they feel as though they're on this island, because a lot of their friends they're typically working for somebody else. They're not facing those same challenges, so they don't have anybody within their immediate circle to talk to. So you're right, when an entrepreneur owner meets another group of entrepreneurs, then it's almost like they can let their guard down. They start talking about the challenges. They realize, you're right, that a lot of them are facing the same challenges, whether it be people challenges, lack of cash flow, struggling to have a good strategy. Maybe they can't really execute on their plan because they're so busy. Mm-hmm. But there's all that common thread that goes through a lot of business owners.
So they ever like cry on your shoulder?
I've had a few. Especially, what's interesting is when they really break down those barriers and open up to you. It even gets down to personal situations, because they're so busy at work and they're maybe spending 15 hours a day, and that then starts affecting their personal life. And that's when it really starts to get emotional. So I've seen a lot of business owners really struggle with trying to, balance is a commonly used word, but really struggle to try and figure out how they balance their time.
I found that if you think about someone that started a business and the journey they've been on, and you catch them 5-6 years later, and they've been through the trenches, they've been through some really hard stuff that really tested their mettle. But do you find that often they've kind of forgotten their why they started the thing in the first place?
Absolutely. I would say the majority have, unless they have some type of, mentor or coach or other peers around them that, remind them. But I would say the majority I come across, they just get so entrenched with trying to, make a profit, hire the right people, that they often forget about why they got into business. And yeah, it's usually some type of action or knock on the head that maybe gets them to remind of why they started the business and what their journey is.
So where are they, on the hero's journey? You meet the hero and they're in their status quo. Then they learn that status quo is not going to work anymore. And then they realize, oh my gosh, a lot of change is coming and they're struggling with the change. And so they go into the pit. In the story framework, it's called the pit.
Yeah.
Before they start to kind of learn some lessons and then get determined and march out. Where are they in that journey when you engage with them often?
Most of the time, I feel as though they're either on that plateau or maybe they're on that pit, as you call it, or valley. That they feel as though they maybe been spinning their wheels for a number of years. They're working so much in the business or in the weeds that they can't figure out why they're not growing, why they're not profitable, and they just need that outside help. And that's I really enjoy going in at that point because I feel as though they're ready to embrace the help of an outside counsel, coach, or mentor. And I enjoy that because I want to be able to help them. I want to be able to guide them through and be able to see that light at the end of the tunnel.
So like that group where you go in and go, my name's Steve, and I must admit I need some help running my business. Is it like that?
It's like that, yeah. It's like that. But that's a good position to be in because, there are a lot of owners out there that are still struggling, but I think their ego gets in the way and they just keep trying to work harder. They work longer hours and that starts affecting them. That starts affecting their family, starts affecting their health and other employees around them. And then they wonder why employees start leaving them and they start spinning the wheels even faster. So it's sad when you see situations like that where their ego or some other obstacle gets in the way.
So your book is the Ironman Mindset. Somewhere along the way, you connected the lessons that you were learning while preparing or running or participating in an Ironman, and you connected it with like, hey, this is hard as running a business or harder. I don't know. Tell us where that light bulb went on for you. What was going on? Why did you decide to approach it from that direction?
Yeah, well, writing a book was part of my bucket list. My dad had written a bunch of books, and I thought, I'd love to write a book. And I was trying to figure out what my topic was going to be. And I started to think about, I played a lot of soccer, rugby through my life and loved those sports, but my body was starting to break down a little bit. So when I started to do the Ironman races, or certainly the smaller triathlons, I started to think about, I've never done an Ironman before. I could barely even do the triathlons because I'm such a bad swimmer. I mean, I could literally swim one length of the pool. And then I started to think, why am I, it's up in my head that I'm starting to be that barrier to the future, what my vision looks like. So I started to think about, what can I achieve if I want to do a full Ironman? That's 2.5 mile swim, 112 mile bike, and full marathon. What's stopping me? And I thought, there's nothing really stopping me. I just need to figure out how I get there. So it's the same in business. Typically, there's not necessarily a barrier to where you're going in business, whether it be a revenue number or going into different markets. It's just your own mind that limits you. So once you figure out where you're going, what your journey looks like in 3, 5, 15 years, then you start working backwards. You start figuring out, how can I get there? What does it look like? And I start breaking it down into smaller chunks. So I started just to piece together all these things I'd learned in running the business and doing my Ironman training into a book, which was, it's a short, simple read, but it really breaks down those simple principles around how you can take your business to the next level.
So I would assume that one of the main lessons in your book, I haven't read your book, but I would assume one of the lessons is persistence.
Definitely persistence is discipline. I mean, when you're having to train 20, 25 hours a week, you need to be super disciplined. I mean, I was, waking up at 3:30, 4 in the morning.
Wow.
And the night before, I was looking at my training plan and figuring out, well, if I have to train 3 or 4 hours tomorrow, and typically there were 2 training sessions a day, I need to be really disciplined and intentional about my schedule. So, okay, if I want to train at this time of day, then how do my meetings plan around it? Because at the time I had 350 employees. So there's a lot of pressure on me to perform at work as well and make sure all my employees and all their families had a vision. So yeah, my meetings were very structured. I was very intentional about every single day I went into work. I had my training plan to work to. And so yeah, that just helped me in being successful in not only in my business, but also personally through my Ironman journey.
Excellent. So if you're listening on Verbal, VURBL, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We've got a great conversation going on with Robert Clinkenbeard. His company is the Radix Group, and his book is the IronmanMindset. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe as well. So Robert, I got some questions that I get asked these questions often, and so I'd love to know what your answer is. And I think the first question on everybody's mind is, okay, there's soccer and there's rugby. So did you have to learn to be like a real prima donna and fall down in soccer and act like you're hurt? And then when you flip it in rugby, it's like, no, I'm not hurt. Your nose is hanging off.
No, I mean, if many people know Scotland and soccer, or football as I call it, I mean, most of those players there were all pretty hard players. So we're not like the, I'm going to offend people by saying we're not like the Spanish or the Italians that like flop around. And so that's rare. But yeah, it was, I think moving into rugby it's a super hard sport, but very much team orientated. So I can go to any rugby club in the world and they'll open up the doors, they'll find jobs for me. But really that great teamwork, and you're all knowing your strengths and you're helping each other out. It's the same in business. If you create little small teams, then you'll know their strengths and weaknesses. Then typically you'll get more done rather than just trying to be that individual.
Excellent answer. I just thought that was, when you said you played both, I thought that was really funny because it's opposite.
Well, all right. So true.
So the first question, this is in your area. What is personal growth?
Personal growth is, I feel as though it's sharpening the saw. Always trying to learn more, better yourself, whether it be personally, being a better father, being a better husband, whether it be learning things through podcasts, through courses. But I always feel as though if you're not growing, you're dying. So always just trying to figure out, how can I push myself? How can I take myself out of my comfort zone?
Wow. Excellent. So why is personal growth important?
I just feel as though if you're going to get somewhere in life, I think it's always good to learn. I mean, we're in such a world now, certainly changed when I was growing up, where there's so much information and data available through Google, through YouTube. You can pretty much learn whatever you want to do. So why not take advantage of that and try and better yourself? Again, that could be personally, that could be in business. So sharpen the saw. Don't look at the TV. Look at the data. Look at books. Look at podcasts. so many people out there, business owners that are willing to share their information. So take advantage of that.
Yeah, it seems a lot that nowadays it's kind of a low bar. If you just take on those activities that you're describing,
So
wow,
true.
what a competitive advantage.
Yep.
So how do you measure personal growth, Robert?
I think if I'm around business owners and even just other people in the community, and I feel as though I can have good conversations with people and I'm aware of what's going on in the world and the community, and I could give back and communicate intelligently, then I feel as though I'm always learning.
I feel that the way I can kind of measure personal growth is that you remember that time like you felt like you're down in the mud and you just stopped and you looked up and it didn't feel like you were going anywhere and you didn't feel like you're winning. But when you turn around and look back and see how far you've come, it's like, oh my gosh, I was so wrapped up in the battle, but look what's been going on.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even, going back to my book, I mean, that the whole Ironman mindset, I feel as though, one of the phrases I like a lot is only good things happen on the other side of fear.
Mm.
So when you're a challenging situation, whether you're successful, you have a win from it, I feel as though you're always going to have a win by either having experience that you'll know not to do it again, or you'll get that confidence by being successful at whatever you've challenged yourself. So always go and lean into those challenges and then come out and look back and said, I learned from that.
Excellent. So how do you define your vision?
I do two things. I ask people, what's your personal BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goal? So what do you want to look like in 10 or 15 years? Whether it's helping others. But I really like to sit down with people, and I use my IronmanMindset planner, which is, okay, what do we look like in 10 or 15 years? What do we look like in 3 years? And look at what those measures are, whether it be business achievements, whether it be personal achievements, even things like travel. But I'm always looking at that. I even get to the point where I'll sit down with my family every December and I'll do a vision board with them. And, the kids are all doing things like pets and puppies and bikes and all stuff like that. But
that's what I do.
The fact that they're just getting into that habit of looking to where they're going in the future. And it just gives them something to strive towards.
I love that. Teaching them to have an expectation of the future that's deliberate, that you can actually control instead of just flowing down the stream.
Yeah, and that day to day and not really having any objective.
Wow. So you work with leaders, and so I want you to fill in the blank on this one, okay?
Okay.
And so a company's strategic vision concerns
what their roadmap is for the future. Where are they going? Is that a revenue goal? Is that a charitable giving back? What's their purpose? And then getting all their people behind them, getting the whole company behind them. It doesn't necessarily have to be revenue, but I just feel as though, especially with millennials, that they're not necessarily in business working for people for the money. Money is obviously a nice side benefit, but they'll get behind the company and their purpose and where they're going. I don't think leaders explain and communicate that properly.
Yeah, I think that's like the biggest challenge every leader has. Is it's clear in here.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I've said it before sometime in the past, right? But it's like you're surprised as I thought I said that, right? But it's so much more, right?
Yeah, it's so much more. I mean, I don't understand why, leaders just can't do, even I recommend doing like a quarterly town hall, bring their team in, comes from one source, and inspire people, get them behind you. That's more likely to get people through challenging times if they have that vision and where they're going, um, than just not communicating at all. People are trying to, because if you leave things blank, people will fill in that verbiage. They'll just fill in their own communication. So why not be intentional about the communication where the company's going?
Yeah. So we're having a great conversation with Robert Clinkenbeard. His company is the Radix Group. He's the author of the Ironman Mindset, and his podcast is The Commercial Landscapers. If you're listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like and check out Robert's book. So, Robert, you said something a little earlier about fear, that personal growth is on the other side of fear. When you started training for these Ironmans, tell us about a big fear that came upon you that you didn't expect.
I didn't think I was capable of doing it. I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, I literally could swim. I mean, you can't really see me, but I'm a big rugby guy, big legs, and, did a lot of weights when I was younger. So here I am, trying to struggle to the end of the pool, one length, and I'm expected to swim 2.5 miles, again, out in open water. I could do it in the pool all day long because I can stand up.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I definitely had a lot of fear around whether I could even complete the race. But one of the things that kept me going, especially in Arizona when I was training, pretty brutal summers. So, you're out training in 100+ degrees. But, what kept me going is, I suppose, a sense of pride. But I didn't want to let my family down. I knew one of the things you talk about vision and where you're going. One of the things that was in my head was my family at the finish line. My young kids, my wife, they had to put up with me training all these hours every week. And I didn't want to let them down. So when I had those really challenging days where I'm out on the bike for 5 or 6 hours, doing 4,000 or 5,000 feet of climbing on the bike, or running 20 miles just in a training race, that's what the vision kept me going. Because we all face challenges every single day. We all face personal challenges. We all face family struggles, stress through money, and you really have to just fight your way through it and look at some of the positives. Where are you going? What are the things that are going to push you through that fear factor?
So when you wrote your book, I've written a book, so I'm asking from experience, but there was that book. I ran into a situation where I was like, I really had to get over some fear, because when I saw that first draft of my book, the rough draft, when I read it, I was like embarrassed. And I really had anxiety for days about it. It's like, what in the world have I done? Did you have that experience with yours?
I was nervous. I don't think I had a huge amount of fear because I took a little bit of an easier route. I had and I talk about this in my book actually, is I had a coach to help me write my book. Somebody had written 5 or 6 books. So they were the ones who interviewed me, recorded me, and helped me sound good. Mm-hmm. That takes a lot. But and that's where I talk about in my book, where I think if you're aware of your strengths and you invest in your strengths, but you're aware of your weaknesses, and don't let your ego take away from your weaknesses. Hire the people or surround yourself with experts, coaches, mentors. Even when I first started my landscape business, I was really struggling in the financial part. I didn't really understand the financials, but I knew that early on. And again, I thought, well, do I really want to pay money to get somebody in? But I eventually hired a fractional CFO because I knew I really needed to understand the numbers. So yeah, really try and figure out what you're good at, what you're bad at or weak at, and make sure that you surround yourself with the right people just to break through some of those challenges.
Excellent. So, Robert, always like to ask is like, what's one question that I didn't ask you today that you really wished you could have answered?
I would say, what were the one or two pivotal moments in my business that could help scale up my business in a short amount of time?
Yeah, what were those?
Two things: finding the right people to run my company.
Mm-hmm.
So, it took me a while to really find the future leaders of my company because I knew there was going to be an exit at some point. So I took my time in trying to find some people that I knew that I could coach and mentor and train to take over the company. And that's what helped with not only my exit, but also help with the increasing the valuation of my business. And then the second thing is to have a framework in which I could scale my business. There was a couple of programs out there, Traction and Scaling Up.
Mm-hmm.
And it just allowed me to, again, create my vision, create my quarterly rocks or goals, and hold myself accountable and bring in some of those key performance indicators to help hold my team accountable to where the company was going. So that's what really started to create that flywheel, that momentum, and grow my business.
Yeah, Gino Wickman was a guest recently, and so he's got a great system. That's the book Traction,
Yep.
Entrepreneurial Operating System, and then the Scaling Up book. That's an excellent book. Who's the author of that?
Vern Harnish.
Yeah, that's an excellent book as well. It's super tricky or super risky. It's so important that you bring in the right people to take over your company. It's like everybody that's been following you to that point, they're bought into you. They're bought into your vision, where you're going. And all of a sudden, these new people show up. And it's like, there's a big risk that these guys will take it off in a different direction. And I think that's like, yeah, it's just a big risk. How did you do that successfully?
It was definitely challenging because, there's definitely a bunch of authors out there that they talk about the people that, the people that got you there are not necessarily the same people that will take you to the next level.
Right.
So you almost, again, it goes back to a point I made earlier, you've got to find, again, those strengths and weaknesses in your employees. So, maybe they stay in a lower position, but again, their ego might not necessarily allow them to get past that. So sometimes there's a little bit of a transition that goes on with employees. But if you want to take the company to another level, we took our business up to 20 million, I knew that the people that we started the business with were not the right people. So yeah, it was definitely challenging, and I definitely felt bad for the people that got me there. But I just had to really had some good, transparent conversations with them and explain to them why, and hopefully find a position in the company that still allowed them to grow personally. But it just wasn't necessarily in that leadership role.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. Robert, you've been a great guest on the ROI Online Podcast. Where can folks reach out to you, or how best would people connect with you and get set up in your system somehow?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks again, Steve. So a few different ways people can get hold of me: through LinkedIn, Robert Clinkenbeard on LinkedIn. they can go to my website. They can get my book there. It's the Radix Group, LLC.com. And then, I'd also be happy to send any listeners a copy of my book if they want to text the number 33777 using the word Radix, RADIX. I'd be happy to give your listeners a copy of my book. So
awesome. That's great. How about that, audience? You get a reward for putting up with me and meet all these great guests so that you learn you're not crazy either. So, Robert, you've been excellent. I really enjoyed it and I've learned a lot. So thanks for listening to the ROI Online Podcast. You guys be sure to go get Robert's book, The IronmanMindset. I know it's on Amazon. Do we have a audible version as well, Robert?
There's an audible version, and I'm happy to send people a copy as well. So
Did you read the audible version? Is it in your Nebraska accent?
No, I didn't have the time for that, but maybe I should redo that.
All right, and that's a wrap.